2019 was admittedly a slower year in terms of game releases, especially for me, as I only ended up playing about 5 games this year, all but one of which were RPGs. Although it's looking like 2020 is going to be a huge year in terms of game releases, and I can't wait to see what the first year of the decade has in store. Back to 2019, however, a slow year doesn't necessarily mean it wasn't fun, as all the games I played in 2019 were definitely fun. In this video, I'll be taking a look back and ranking all the games I played from worst to best. This, of course, is all my opinion, and I'm open to discussion in the comments. I also want to make it clear that I thoroughly enjoy every game on this list, and even the one that's ranked the lowest is one that I still consider okay at worst. I put a lot of thought into this list and think it's overall pretty accurate towards my opinions. The first game on the list, and coincidentally the first game I played this year, is Splatoon 2. Splatoon was always an interesting concept to me. Very rarely nowadays do you see a competitive shooter that really breaks the boundaries of the genre and adds a unique twist that makes the game stand out as much as Splatoon. A game whose aesthetic and gameplay makes it completely different from any other shooter on the market, except for, of course, Crayola Scoot. Entering Splatoon, I had high expectations to see how much I would enjoy it. There are 3 major components to Splatoon's gameplay: the single-player campaigns, including the Octo expansion, Salmon Run, and the normal PvP mode. The single-player campaign on its own is kind of fun the first time around, but really loses all the value after that, and I never really felt like going back and doing any of the levels after beating it once. But it is a good way to introduce you to the game, featuring many gameplay elements and mechanics that teach the player the fundamentals. The Octo expansion is a great DLC campaign, featuring smaller, more concentrated challenges compared to the fully fleshed out levels of the base game campaign. They were all fun and indirectly provided different difficulty settings in the form of the different weapon options you have. I really liked this DLC, and the secret boss of the expansion, while it frustrated me to no end, was very enjoyable and challenging in a good way. Both campaigns are fun the first time, but while the Octo expansion is actually pretty replayable, the same can hardly be said for the base game campaign. Salmon Run is basically the co-op version of Splatoon, where you team up with 3 other players, assuming one of them doesn't leave, which they always do, and fight AI-controlled opponents with preset weapons the game assigns to you, at random, which honestly is the deciding factor of how much fun you're going to have, besides the teammates you get. While some weapons like the umbrella and roller are fun to use, others like the paint bucket and the dualies are just really boring. There really isn't anything else to say about Salmon Run. It's fun, but not super fun, which is pretty much my opinion on the PvP mode as well. Don't get me wrong, all the ink mechanics and the general gameplay is fantastic, but since this is a Nintendo game, it has to be taken down a couple pegs by the online. The maps and game modes are on rotation and change every 2 hours, which still makes no sense to me. Let me pick my game mode and just make all the maps available, and this game would be miles better. Luckily, however, the weapons in PvP are much more diverse than in Salmon Run. Even if there's only a few classes of weapon, all of the individual weapons have different quirks, not to mention different sub-weapons and specials, leading to a wide variety of ways to play. You can also customize your clothing to have special abilities and attributes, but the process to get the ones you want is mind-numbingly tedious and something I would recommend to nobody. The game modes in Splatoon 2 are mostly fun, and it all comes down to preference, but in my opinion there are ones that just wildly outclass others, which is especially annoying because the mode you play is at the mercy of whatever the servers choose at the time when you play. Modes like Rainmaker, where you have to acquire and carry a powerful but heavy cannon to the other team's side, are vastly more fun and engaging than modes like Splat Zones, where you control a commonly tiny area of the map with your ink and then camp and kill players who try to take it back. If you don't want to play Ranked, however, you're stuck in Turf War, which is by far the worst and most boring out of all the game modes. I don't understand why we can't play ranked game modes unranked, but it is what it is. Overall, Splatoon 2 is a mostly fun game, but it's very inconsistent and definitely not something I would recommend someone get super into competitively. Rather, playing it here and there just for fun is something that I think makes the game much more approachable and fun. Pokémon Sword and Shield were arguably the most controversial games this year, even if they still sold incredibly well. From the start, the fanbase was optimistic, but as more and more negative things got announced, people became far more skeptical, especially when it came to the infamous Dexit, the announcement that not all Pokémon would be available in the game. A very large part of the fanbase, including myself, was extremely dismayed at this news. Especially since we had already seen underwhelming footage and announcements regarding the game, the idea of cutting Pokémon was just hugely frustrating. Would the game somehow be good enough for all of this to be forgivable? Well, not really. First of all, while the character models and animations generally look okay, it is definitely clear there wasn't too much effort put into making the game the best it could be. There are a lot of cut corners and frankly laughable portions of the game which can hardly be ignored. But in playing the game, it's not horrible. The characters in this game are the best we've had since Black and White, and all of them are memorable and likable except for Bede in the first half of the game. The new Pokémon are unsurprisingly fantastic, and every one of them is very expressive and memorable. Except for Inteleon. Inteleon sucks. The gameplay is still Pokemon, but there are a lot of quality of life changes that make it a lot more fun to customize your Pokemon, such as TRs and Nature Mints. New features in the game are very good as well. I love Pokemon Camp, I got a very substantial amount of enjoyment out of it, and max raid battles are very fun and engaging, especially with friends, although they can get very easy after a while. Also houses some of the best music in the series, with Hop's second battle theme becoming my favorite track in the entirety of Pokemon. And now, with the good out of the way, it's time to talk about the more disappointing aspects of the game. The wild area is not nearly as good as what I expected, and to be frank, I really wasn't expecting much to begin with. It's mostly just big empty space with power spots, trees, and tall grass placed randomly throughout. It's not as expansive as I thought either. For what was marketed as an open world Pokemon experience, it's honestly quite small. A large amount of weather conditions certainly makes it more interesting, as the variety of Pokemon that can be found is pretty diverse, but it doesn't change that the wild area itself is very boring. The post-game in Sword and Shield is pretty much non-existent, which was expected with the series' track record as of late, although I am still disappointed that they didn't give us something more. The game is also very easy, and doesn't give the player choices to increase difficulty at all. Even turn off the XP share. While Sword and Shield turned out passably, I'm very much hoping that Game Freak takes initiative and puts more effort into the games in the future, because the way the series is going now, I don't think it's going to turn out very good. But considering their track record and the fact that Sword and Shield sold like hotcakes, I doubt that will happen. I had no idea what to expect out of Xenoblade 2. Going into it, I thought I would either love it or hate it, and given how big of a game it is, it was a pretty big risk to take. The result? I loved it. First, I'll talk about the environments. They're very unique and complex, with lots of area to explore. Each new locale was fun to see and walk through for the first time, and even more fun to go through again and find all the hidden stuff. The gameplay is complicated. A lot of the combat is dependent on setup, whereas the actual combat itself isn't as important. It's pretty linear towards the end of the game specifically, where all you have to do is get blade combos and then use a chain attack, and repeat until the enemy dies. What's far more important is the accessories, pouch items, and blade builds you use. Speaking of which, the blades in this game are very interesting. Each rare blade has its own unique affinity chart to fill out by raising trust and completing certain tasks, which enhance its abilities and strength. Building the blades is fun too, as there's a lot you can do with them. You can use core chips and ox cores to modify your blades, which in and of itself doesn't seem like much, but when you take into account there are many different weapon classes with different moves for each character, you can equip 3 blades per character and have a party of any of the 3 out of 5 characters you want. You realize how much potential and variety there is. There are countless combinations and strategies you can go for, and for the most part, they're all viable. This isn't even mentioning the character Tora, whose blade is the most customizable out of all of them, with seemingly endless builds you can use depending on the chips you use. The combat itself is very engaging in the beginning as you progress and learn new things, but towards the end it becomes a lot less fun in comparison to the preparation for the combat. Additionally, the story and characters in this game are fantastic. All the characters ooze with charm, and they're all very fun to learn about and listen to. The voice acting, however, is quite hit or miss, with some lines being delivered greatly and others being frankly quite bad. The story was fun to progress through and held my interest to the end, but I wasn't exactly on the edge of my seat. Don't get me wrong, it's a fantastic story, the writing is great, but there weren't many tense moments. There were a lot of really emotional scenes here and there which were very powerful and well done. The cliffhangers and big climaxes and surprises were a lot less frequent. Music in the game is great as well, with both the environment tracks and the battle themes being a treat to listen to even after hours of exposure to them. But in my opinion, the crown jewel of Xenoblade 2 is the sheer amount of content and things to do. I haven't even bought the DLC yet, and I already have about 300 hours in the game, and there's still lots of stuff for me to do. There are just mountains of content in this game. Heart-to-hearts, blade affinity charts, fighting the super bosses, driver affinity charts, getting all the rare blades, side quests, building trust for your blades. There's just so much to do, and for the most part, it's all fun. Dragon Quest has been described by many as the king of JRPGs, and after playing Dragon Quest XI, I can definitely see why. There is so much to love in this game. First off, the combat is great. I think my favorite part about it is that instead of picking all your moves before the turn starts, you pick your moves only when it's that character's turn. It takes away all the guesswork of how the battle circumstances are going to change by the time that character moves. The fights stay consistently challenging throughout the game, although there are some abrupt difficulty spikes which pose a pretty big problem. Since there are no random encounters, it's very easy to go through areas without fighting anything. But when you approach a tougher boss, you'll be completely halted and have to go back and grind for quite a bit to be able to fight it. But it isn't always a death sentence. The game gives you plenty of tools to work yourself out of a checkmate scenario. Each character is a different archetype and unlocks different spells as they level up and can use different weapons, which all have different properties. The characters also have unique skill trees which unlock buffs, passive abilities, or new weapon techniques that can be very handy alongside spells. The game definitely encourages you to try different setups of party members, accessories, and weapons to form a team that suits your playstyle. The story of Dragon Quest XI is surprisingly pretty good. While most of the villains are your generic bad guys who want to destroy the world, the game still subverted my expectations and had a lot of twists that left me wanting more, and the third act of the game has a story element that's very powerful as well, that generally makes it difficult, emotionally, to progress through that point. The most well-executed part of the story, in my opinion, is the pacing. It never feels like it's going too fast or too slow, it's always just right. The world building is also phenomenal. The characters themselves, however, are a mixed bag. Some are definitely better than others, and it shows. Characters like Eric, Sylvando, and the 8th character you get are extremely good in terms of writing, and were my favorites in this game. However, characters like Jade were a bit more on the mediocre or even bad side. Characters like Rab are somewhere in between, but if I had to choose, I'd say Rab himself leans more toward the mediocre side, only kept afloat by some really good story moments here and there. The side characters are nothing to write home about, but they're still at least good in their own right, with some that personally stood out to me like Prince Ferris and Jasper. The music in the game isn't very diverse, but what surprised me the most is that it really didn't get too repetitive even after listening to the same battle theme for every fight. It's catchy, in a good way, upbeat, and fun, which really encompasses the rest of the game. Hands down, the most iconic element of Dragon Quest XI is the charm of it. Down to the animations, everything in this game is so full of personality and expressiveness. The enemies are a perfect example of this. Despite most of them being just common enemies, the amount of charm in their animations makes them all a spectacle to fight. And the story is so full of lighthearted whimsicality that it's easy to get lost in it and forget what big things are at stake, and how tough the situation may be. I've been a huge Fire Emblem fan since Awakening, and with so many delays and waiting for Fire Emblem Three Houses, I could hardly contain my excitement by the time it came out. I played this game non-stop until I beat every single story, and then I wanted more, and I kept playing. Everything in this game is fine-tuned to near perfection, to the point where I don't even know where to start with this game. Before that, however, I guess I should go over the 3 actual issues I have with it. It's quite easy, it leaves a very small amount of plot threads unfinished, and there's no post-game, which admittedly I was very disappointed by after what I thought was a very good post-game in Shadows of Valentia. Now on to the good. The gameplay is as good as it's ever been, with hordes of new mechanics and features that add so much to the strategic value, which is increased tenfold by the fact that you can customize your units and party in a way I never thought would be possible in a Fire Emblem game. You have so much control over your team, and the experience is tailored to the player almost entirely, but the combat itself is only the tip of the iceberg. Exploring the monastery is a treat as well, with so many things to do, especially taking into consideration the DLC activities. The monastery activities themselves are so seamlessly integrated into the combat that choosing what to do on certain days feels like part of the battle, which it definitely is. Instructing your students and setting their goals is also very satisfying. The characters themselves are utterly incredible. Even the ones I was sure I was going to dislike, I ended up loving. Heck, Felix, a character who was my least favorite before the game came out, ended up being one of my favorite characters in the whole game. Every personality has a backstory which are so well written that even the characters with more pretentious or irritating personalities end up being so lovable and memorable. Easily, these are the best characters I've ever seen in a Fire Emblem game. The great writing continues with the story. Past games like Fates and Awakening had a very pretentious, very black and white story with clearly defined flat bad guys and benevolent and heroic good guys. The protagonists and antagonists in this game are all morally ambiguous and relatable, and killing the characters you spend the first half of the game getting to know so well hurt in ways I couldn't imagine. Edelgard, who plays the antagonist in the majority of the story paths, has become my favorite antagonist in a video game, period, and is up there with Lucina and Robin as my favorite Fire Emblem characters of all time. And Dimitri, Claude, and Setath, who play the lords in the other paths, are not far behind. Even Raphael, who on the surface is an extremely flat and boring character, is extremely likable and well written once you get to know his character more. To add, the world building is also leaps and bounds above Awakening and especially Fates, and while it isn't exactly a high bar, it's still impressive. The music in this game is just unbelievable, which nowadays is standard for Fire Emblem, but Three Houses takes it even further. Every single track is a masterpiece, and I have listened to countless hours of this music and I still enjoy it just the same as when I heard it for the first time. The music expresses the emotions and atmosphere of the setting so well that I've never seen anything quite like it before. And the voice acting, where do I begin? Every actor gives a breathtaking performance, even the NPCs. Every line of dialogue was a joy for the ears. Every single part of this game is a masterclass, and I can't wait to see what's next for the Fire Emblem series. There have been a lot of games this year, but out of all of them, I'm pretty sure most people watching this video will know which one will end up being my game of the year. In reality, there was really no contest. You all know the name, say it with me. It's Disney's Tsum Tsum Festival for the Nintendo Switch. There is really not a lot. Look at the gameplay, look at the characters, look at the music, look at the story, look at the combat, look at the variety.